then it is my pleasure to introduce Eric Janus, who's Deputy County Administrator, and then he will be followed by Megan Kilgore, who is the City Auditor. And Eric and Megan, this is our large Recovery and Resiliency Committee. There are many of us, so we're not going to go around and all introduce ourselves. We probably know everyone here, but suffice to say, these are phenomenal leaders in this community, from business, nonprofit, small business, and the like, all who are giving their time to look at how we recover in a resilient way with equity, you know, at the center of our work, and prepare for coming out of this pandemic time, if you will. And the last thing I'll say about this is, you know, it is our hope that we not only look at, you know, how do we rebound from this time, but also where there are opportunities to do things differently, where there are opportunities for us to be innovative and to try some new things. You know, this is the time to do it. And I think that this committee, either through their expression on the call, or I know to some of us privately, have said, you know, why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? And we are going to get to those solution steps next, probably in early February, in our second phase, where we go into the working group phase and start looking at solutions. So if you've got anything that you want to throw at us for us to think about in that phase, now's the time to do it. Is Eric having problems, Hannah? Eric, you ready?
Hi, everybody. I am on, although I don't seem to be clearly connected. I don't have video of either myself or anybody else. I do have audio if you can hear me, and I can get started that way.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
We can't see you.
As Mike Stevens just texted me, that you all will just have to miss my handsome face. So I apologize for my technical difficulties. Good afternoon, everybody. Eric Janus, Deputy County Administrator for the Franklin County Board of Commissioners, and happy to just make a few remarks and give some perspective from the Franklin County Board of Commissioners point of view on what has happened so far in 2020 and what we look like going forward in 2021. As I'm sure it is of no doubt, and I do understand that there have been several prior meetings with different policy areas. And interestingly, I'm sure that almost every one of those policy areas touches county government and the work that we do in one way or another. So we're happy to be a part of this discussion. COVID-19 obviously tested all of us back in March, and it certainly tested Franklin County. And as it came to pass, tested us from both a fiscal strength and sustainability standpoint. The Board of Commissioners went ahead and took action way back on March 12th when it passed Resolution 181-20, which authorized actions taken under emergency measures to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the residents of Franklin County, and gave the county administrator specific powers for, with respect to resources, personnel, purchasing and acquisition, and working with external partners in order to help during the pandemic. And of course, we immediately got to work. First, I'll talk a little bit about what we did from an operations point of view. We immediately started convening weekly elected officials meetings, and county administration additionally facilitated county-wide senior staff meetings on a daily basis. And in addition to that, so that we can all communicate. In addition to that, we created new normal work groups to provide recommendations for making county operations continue in a safe and consistent manner. And that work was organized around committees broken up into the following categories: facilities needs and business access, human resources, general meetings, technology, and communications. We appreciated the support not just of obviously Board of Commissioner agencies, but all elected officials and agencies throughout county government, and additional participation from Franklin County Public Health and frankly the City of Columbus Public Health as well. Those recommendations looked at adjusting our operations to obviously reduce the number of staff in our facilities, eventually closing them, and then subsequently later in the year reopening them on a limited basis depending on county business to be done. We included the use of telework and the limit of in-person meetings in doing so. We also then invested in additional network infrastructure, purchase of computers and laptops, for instance, to support staff work from home. We eventually invested nearly $1 million in those improvements to our telework capabilities. We established protocols for social distancing, as did many others, including the installation of barriers where keeping 6 feet apart is not possible. And that involved a fair amount of investment to our county assets, including such things as plexiglass in courtrooms, for instance. Increased cleaning, obviously, hand sanitizer and the like. We wanted to, once we started to figure out our operations, obviously work as expeditiously as we could to provide support in the community at large. It started with messaging. We partnered with Franklin County Public Health to communicate the importance of hand washing, social distancing, facial coverings, and the like. We partnered with organizations like the African American Male Wellness Agency on mask up events throughout the county for distribution of masks. And then we got to work about trying to invest in our community on multiple fronts from a county perspective. We invested in nonprofits all across the community with respect to COVID-19 and what we were calling Resilience Initiative grants. And we made several of those, and I will talk about those in a second. Many of these programs were funded initially through redirecting of either county general fund or federal streams of dollars flowing through Franklin County. But eventually, Franklin County, like the city of Columbus, received an allocation from the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act. Franklin County was actually awarded, after some heavy advocacy work and affirmation of the rules based on population that we were eligible, we awarded an amount of $76.3 million. We have, as of today, spent all 76.3 million of those dollars. And I'll go through a little bit about what we've done and how that impacted our budget. We've spent nearly $7 million to assist our levy agencies for programming across the spectrum, including obviously increased investments in addiction services during this difficult time, free meals for older adults that are sheltering in place, and supplemental court costs for children in the county's care through children's services. One thing we're very proud of is that we partnered with the city of Columbus to create the Columbus Franklin County COVID-19 Small Business Response and Recovery Fund. We put eventually $2.5 million towards that effort. It seemed like in the first weeks of the pandemic, Mike Stevens and I were on the phone on multiple times a week trying to figure out how we can assist folks. This particular program, many of you might be aware of, particularly those in city government, provided relief grants of up to $10,000 to provide financial assistance to sustain small business operations. And then we had a separate partner program that provided up to $5,000, requiring a match for small business return safety grants. Those were for personal protective equipment and equipment for businesses. One of the things I'm most proud of, and I hope Mike feels the same way, is that we were able to coordinate stand up a very, very difficult program and very quickly, and assist businesses very quickly. In a way in which our programs complemented each other. As the city received its allocation and focused on businesses within its jurisdiction, we focused ours on businesses throughout the rest of Franklin County. But through the good partnership with Rev 1 and some of our community partners who sought out these small businesses, we were able to provide one seamless front door and one evaluation process. And I think that's extraordinarily helpful to the business community at large. Very proud of that. In addition to that, this summer, earlier this fall, we provided $2 million to the Columbus Urban League for establishing the Franklin County Equity Fund to support minority-owned businesses. That was throughout all of Franklin County. Those dollars are also exhausted. We provided $1.5 million to the Mid-Ohio Food Collective to respond to increased requests for assistance due to the pandemic. 47,000 new unduplicated customers were served more than 2 million meals from March 1st through May 30th alone. $2 million for support in rental assistance and eviction prevention, another partnership with not just the City of Columbus, but key housing and nonprofit providers throughout the community. We did that in two ways. We provided $500,000 to the Impact Community Actions Hope Fund and supported that effort. We also provided $1.5 million of CARES Act money to Franklin County's Department of Job and Family Services to create what we called PRC Plus program. Some of you on this call may be familiar with PRC. It is the one-time emergency assistance program provided to residents that are income eligible in our community with TANF dollars. We recognize that in this crisis, there might be some people that are just above that TANF threshold, but still in desperate need of assistance. And so we built a complementary program in order to help keep people in their homes over the last 7 months plus and ongoing. We put more than $5 million towards the Resilience Fund. Again, another partnership with the City of Columbus to provide competitive grant program for nonprofits impacted by COVID. And it's my understanding that for that total pot of money, which I may not get the number exactly right, was $20 or $25 million, we had more than $90 million worth of requests. We put $2 million towards stabilizing childcare centers needing to make health and safety modifications to take care of our community's children. And we provided a host of one-time grants starting right away in March to community nonprofits and other partner organizations to assist every way we can. Those dollars went to organizations such as Life Care Alliance, the Ohio Hispanic Coalition, Charitable Pharmacy, COSI, and the Greater Columbus Arts Council, among many, many others. In addition to that, those uses of CARES Act dollars, we did deploy additional CDBG dollars allocated by the federal government for workforce investments, micro enterprise loans, and business lending assistance. And we also provided additionally $2.4 million in extra dollars, extra ESG emergency shelter grant dollars to our partners over at the Community Shelter Board. Beyond supporting all of those long list of programs, and that's a fair sampling, but not all inclusive, we did also use $33 million plus of our CARES Act money to assist, in effect, assist the county budget by paying for payroll expenditures for public safety and public health during that time, allowable uses. Why is that important? It's important because we were able to, as a result of that, not have to significantly dip into or draw down our general fund reserves in fiscal year 2020. And we are rather proud of that. However, absent any additional federal support, and there are discussions going on as we speak about that, this will not be the case in 2021. Given our circumstances, our 2021 budget was crafted to require prudent budgeting that called for a 2.5% reduction in department baseline budgets in order to reduce reliance on cash reserves this coming year, while still trying our best to preserve service levels in critical health and human service agencies and maintaining our credit rating. Despite those reductions, that 2.5% across the board cut, we expect that we will have to draw down our cash balance in 2021 by more than $31 million. So we managed to, with the assistance of the federal government, to sidestep the worst fiscal damage of 2020 while still providing support to the community. But as of today, will not be the case in 2021. We will be spending down on our cash reserve. Our general fund recommended budget in 2021 is expected to be $461.4 million. That actually reflects a 9.9% decrease when compared to 2020 projections. Now that does include the loss of some revenues related to the CARES Act, but also, for instance, and for interest of those of you on this call, our investment earnings are expected to be down or budgeted to be down more than 40% in 2021. The largest proportion of the general fund in county government in Ohio is the sales tax. For us, that comprises nearly 66% of our general fund revenue. with collections of $303.5 million. The 2021 recommended budget includes an anticipated 1.8% growth in the overall county sales tax collections in 21 when compared to 20 projections, but that's after taking into account the early drop-off earlier in the year. And that is evidenced by the fact that we are actually recommending in our budget passed by the commissioners just yesterday, $10.5 million less in sales tax revenue that was included 1 year ago in the 2020 budget. We don't expect and estimate that our sales tax revenue will rebound completely to pre-pandemic levels until 2022 at the earliest. Programmatically, we are going to continue to prioritize our work as it relates to the Rise Together Poverty Blueprint. And the blueprint will continue to be what I like to call our North Star for our strategic priorities. And that is of critical importance to the commissioners. Our 21 budget does include $2.5 million to continue the work of the Franklin County Innovation Center Leadership Council. The commissioners have appointed that 21-member council, and this year will be about the business of determining the appropriate nonprofit governance structure or strategic affiliation of that organization in order to begin that work. In order to provide certainty to struggling nonprofits, many of you are familiar with our community partnership grant program. We have made the decision to provide continuing funding in 2021. So in other words, the same folks that got money in 2020 are getting the same dollars in 2021. We are not doing a new evaluation process, but rather trying to provide some funding certainty for the key organizations that we have funded in the past. That extension is for this next year only. We expect that the program will revert back to its competitive grant process for fiscal year 2022. From an economic development perspective, the county will continue to prioritize, as we have the last 2 years, our affordable housing efforts. And we will do that by executing our affordable housing framework developed last year. We have dedicated conveyance fee dollars towards that effort, and the first 4 projects to be funded by that, leveraging state tax credits, will be awarded this year. And so we will begin the building of units. The estimated number of units there is well over 200. In addition to that, we will continue to provide important funding for our other economic development partners in the community, some of whom may be on this call, such as Experience Columbus and One Columbus, as we did in 2020. So I wanted to, I guess I'll stop there, but I wanted to just provide a brief perspective on both what we did here this past year and pushing through the pandemic, how we were able to fiscally manage our budget through the leadership of our great county administrator, Ken Wilson, and what it's looking like for everybody for 2021. Now, I would only add that if we are fortunate to get additional federal funds that right now are being talked about to flow to local governments through states, as it is at least currently contemplated, that we will once again, as we did in March, April, and May of this past year, ramp up and stand up or reconvene programs to assist our neediest organizations, partners, and residents here this year as we try to get through the hopefully the last months of this pandemic. So I think with that, I'm guessing I went a little beyond 10 minutes, but I will stop there. And thank you for giving me a few minutes to talk about our budget.
Thank you, Eric. Please stick around for the panel portion of the conversation, and we will turn it over now to Auditor Kilgore.
Thanks, Christy. I'm going to share my screen and go through this some data. First of all, thank you to everyone for giving of your time and your knowledge. It means a lot to me personally, and I know the work of this committee will be used for years to come, so thank you. Today, what I'd like to do is really give you an overview of 2020 as experienced by the City of Columbus and the local economy here. It's important to differentiate. I'm really focused on Columbus versus the entire region, and we'll kind of play those, maybe those correlations out as we continue the conversation. Throughout this, you're going to kind of hear two themes. One, what are the successes lifting us up? And then also, what are the opportunities, the challenges that we do have to contend with? And that's really where I'm hyper-focused in my official role as auditor in the next predominantly 12 months. So in order to think about how, COVID affected us, we have to think about how we entered it. When we entered COVID here at the city of Columbus, we entered it on just about the best footing I could have hoped for. We had had a period of spectacular expansion in the region. We had had significant private sector job growth, and our population growth was also at a significant uptick. With that came its challenges, but certainly from a city of Columbus revenue perspective, we were doing really well, so our cushion was solid. And that's demonstrated, with this financial chart. I just want you to direct your attention to this blue arrow and the column above it, which is our annual income tax. Here at the city, income tax is our driving engine. It makes up just about 77% of all of our general fund revenues. I'll talk about the other revenues later, but if you think about that, as a small business or as a business owner, having, all of your revenues in one pot, predominantly in one primary source, can be kind of scary. But for the city of Columbus, because of the diversity and the composition of our employers being robust in insurance, financial services, healthcare, education, government, and a lot of professional services, we've historically been really stable. In fact, we've only had since we began income tax collections in 1948, we've only had 5 years where we've had negative numbers. So only 5. 3 of those have happened since '02. And the worst year ever was a negative 0.85. I offered that as my foundational knowledge because I say we kind of move like a big steamliner, in the ocean. We move slowly. We do not have the traditional ups and downs that you might see in maybe a really heavy, a manufacturing town or a place that's really just driven by one sole employer. We really have a lot of stability around here. So we had 10 years of positive numbers, income tax collections. Last year being a healthy, 5.5%. And as we entered COVID, we were on really good fiscal footing. What you're looking at now is our balance sheet. And I looked at the folks in the room, Sandy, you're going to know this because this is just like what you look at for your corporation. But we have a hyper focus on the general fund and our balance sheet because those fund balances are really important to look at and to kind of think about what does that duration, how long are we going to be successful in the event of an economic downturn? Because of the period of 10 years of expansion, we had a spectacular fund balance. We had a record-breaking almost $230 million of cash at the end of last year. So really strong numbers. Part of what was making up that really high fund balance was that we had rebuilt our rainy day fund. At the city, in the general fund, we have 3 pots of money. The general fund, and the way I kind of explain that is it's like the checking account of the city. It is where we pay for our operations, our payroll. It's just like the checking account. Below that, we have something that we call basic city services. That's a sub-fund. It's a reserve fund, but a sub-fund that we created after the fiscal collapse of '08 and '09. That we use to really safeguard some monies so that if we have to draw upon them, it is not going to be as severe as digging into the rainy day fund, which I kind of consider to be our retirement account, our 401k. If we do dig into that, that means we are at a point of necessity. We have had traditionally, when we've had to use our rainy day fund, correlation to '08, '09 versus COVID, that's after a period of economic downturn where we've every year kind of snowballed and it's been a necessity that we've had to dig in. So our rainy day fund is at really strong balance right now at the city. It's about $85 million today. On top of that reserve, we do have basic city services, which is currently about $20 million. However, as I'll share in a minute, we are getting an additional $53 million for the general fund from Bureau of Workers' Comp, still yet, probably this week. That money, thanks to council's prudence and the administration's fiscal determination, we're going to bank that money in anticipation of the difficulty in 2021. So point being is we have very, very healthy reserves, certainly worthy of the city's AAA rating. There are only 3 cities in the country right now in the top 25 largest cities, only 3 who maintain a 3 AAA ratings. Just yesterday and the day before, I did rating presentations, and I still feel pretty good about the city's position. So when I was thinking about how to explain, really the city's experience through COVID and, how we have felt the economic repercussions, it was kind of helpful to put this together in a timeline. And so I'll walk you through it. But basically, the left-hand side, we began first part of 2020 anticipating decent growth. My revenue estimate, which is one of the official duties of this office, it sets the ceiling for how much the city can spend on the budgetary side. We estimated about a 3% growth on the income tax side. And that's pretty reasonable given the expansion of the last few years. Very quickly, in March and April and May, which were the bottom for us here in Columbus, as you all know, we had to make a revenue adjustment downward because we had to constrain our expenditures, knowing that revenues were going to be decreasing very rapidly. We made a revenue estimate adjustment based upon some of the numbers we were seeing in March, April, and May. And fortunately, those 2 things happened. But I described the first half for City of Columbus as a Nike swoosh. We had a sharp decline, just like the ubiquitous symbol. We had a sharp decline and then a gradual incline through the period of summer as businesses were either able to open, able to pivot and use things like e-commerce platforms to continue their delivery of services, or they were able to figure out how to remote work. And so that allowed us to make a revenue adjustment positive because 2 things. Income taxes were coming in a little bit better than expected, and we received another rebate from Bureau of Workers' Comp that we were able to immediately distribute to the general fund. It was during this period, though, of the late summer that I really started seeing our Nike swoosh going into the K. And you've heard this talked about nationally. Perhaps you've talked about it already in your sessions. But essentially the K, just for a recap, way that it works from an economic model is you do have a sharp decline. And then those who are able to continue working, those who were always able to work, or those who were unemployed and able to get permanent employment, they're going to continue on the upward trajectory, while those who are unable to because their sector's closed, their business is closed, maybe they had to choose childcare over employment, on the downward. That's the story of Columbus, and that's kind of what I really want to impart upon you today and talk about potential aspects that I think would be really helpful right now. So in October, we were able to make a revenue adjustment increase because of income taxes and the BWC money. And then looking into 2031, I am seeing a slight increase. I have projected a little bit of a bump in income tax, which I'll talk about in a second. We did, just like the county, receive different forms of one-time revenues. To be determined what 2021 might bring in terms of, CARES Act 2.0. But City of Columbus was very fortunate to receive a sizable $157 million of CARES Act money. We also received those 3 Bureau of Workers' Comp rebates, which I described there below. These are sizable chunks of change. We received over $100 million from BWC alone. And I want to just really urge acknowledgement that those are one-time revenues. I'm not forecasting receipts next year. Could be proven wrong, but I'm not considering them right now. We are banking this full amount because 2021, we're not sure, right? No one is where things are going to go. Economically, there's a lot of information on this chart. I really just want to draw your attention to two items. At the end of the month in November, the City of Columbus General Fund was at a negative 0.93. Our income tax was only at a negative 0.59. The other sources of revenues the city has, property tax, kilowatt, we do have things like from fines and fees, parking fees and so forth. They're all really de minimis in comparison to income tax. In aggregate, because they're all largely down because businesses stopped, permits are slow, you know, what have you, in aggregate, they're dragging us down a little bit, but really, you know, where I'm focused right now is wages and how our corporations are doing from a profit perspective. So only at negative 0.59. That's, it's pretty spectacular given our size and, you know, I guess the magnitude of employment or income tax in our city's revenues. What I can tell you, though, is I will think about how we're going to end the year, is that we did have a sprint in our bottom of May, June, July, March, April, May, excuse me, was really tough. We did have a sprint in here like August, September, October, where we did have a rapid improvement. I'm not viewing that to continue. In fact, we've been slowing for the last couple of, at least last 6, 7 weeks, as a result of, you know, COVID, increased infections, as well as there are some restrictions. You know, locally, I'm seeing, you know, kind of job and retail sales, they've been at their slowest pace since they were, you know, back during the times of the actual close, the lockdown. Into December and January and into the first quarter of 21, I'm really predicting more of the same. So these numbers will largely, I suspect, stay pretty constant. It's not until the second half of 2021 do I have anything really increasing. Here's the thing, and like this is where I kind of want to start talking about the K. Yeah, I want to get back to the K because that has been where my focus is 100%. Columbus is a growing city. You know, we have spectacular workforce. We have great talent coming out of the university. Our capital city is very important. We're getting a lot of attention from across the nation, and we have the capacity to bring in these people. We have a lot of land that is untapped, and we are ripe for expansion. What is happening is why, you know, I get asked a lot, how can we have 0.59% negative only in income tax, but we do have really record levels of unemployment? And it's pretty simple. The jobs that we are seeing growing right now are high wage jobs. And those who, of course, have been most impacted by COVID are often on the lower levels of the economic spectrum. And as such, our income tax has not been as negatively impacted by those who have lost jobs because tax collections and our unemployment rate, they don't correlate as much as they used to. And so, for example, I kind of want to unpack this a little bit. We've had a lot of job growth in, frankly, highly educated, high income level types of jobs. The K is deepening. That's where the subtitle is for me right now. Brilliant jobs for Columbus as an economy, but this is certainly going to deepen the necessity for this committee to help with those who are struggling. Part of what is allowing Columbus to kind of go to the forefront with these more agile companies, this is a cool chart from Goldman Sachs. I love this chart because it expresses the technologies that have come into play just since 08 and 09. That's shown on the bottom half of the screen. And someone like Heather Whaling, where your company has been, you know, working remotely and figuring things out for years, I'm sure you employ some of these technologies. One thing for the committee to kind of think is how we as a government can help companies utilize some of these services. What is fueling this job growth? And this is where I want to keep talking about this K. I'm going to take this chart from Kenny McDonald and his group that I used the last couple of days with rating presentations. We have a migration of young professionals. They're coming from all the places, and our growth is really poised because of the highly educated nature of our newcomers. Part of what is inspiring a lot of wage growth around here, healthcare. And healthcare, it's not just the 3 institutions that you see there. This is something that I'm watching closely with respect to income levels. we're seeing a lot of offshoots. We have these pillars in our economy here that are now spinning off these really amazing entities that are doing gene therapy and all kinds of really cool telehealth and unique technologies. This, again, is causing wages in certain sectors to grow significantly, and why we see mitigated income tax levels in terms of our job loss. Offshoots also continue into other sectors like big data, cybersecurity, et cetera. Fueling all of this, by the way, all of these companies that you see and more are spectacular academic institutions, including, of course, Ohio State, Columbus State. And if you just look at the program development, Ohio State now has 15 programs alone that support this middle category. That's going to continue to put Columbus on the map. So where I kind of want to end right now is talking about, of course, why are we all here? It's a tale of two cities. And we have, clear evidence that women and minorities are uniquely and disproportionately impacted by both COVID as a health issue as well as an economic issue. The economic, catastrophe for women and minorities will continue to deepen, and it's going to take years for us to fully be able to unpack and remedy some of the consequences of COVID for these groups. I want to share with you my last kind of, tidbit is really to talk about what we know, from a data perspective. And this gets I'm really proud. Like, one of the best outcomes of COVID has been we've been able to really ramp up our data analytics in a very positive way around here. So I want to share with you this slide, and I can tell you, we can get into, for example, what kind of jobs are in the utilities category. On the left-hand side, these are the NAICS codes. But for example, if you just look at the category of construction or utilities, I can actually dig into these respective larger codes and then figure out what types of jobs are included. But as auditor right now, where I'm focused is really the opportunity to hone in. Back in March, April, May, June, I was looking at the larger corporations because of the materiality to our well-being here at the city. Where I'm hyper-focused now are the minority-owned, women-owned, small and medium-sized businesses that are barely hanging on by a thread. And through this conversation on the panel, I'm going to kind of stop here, but I really want to maybe share with you some ideas that I have for intentional stimulus and the work that we've already done with the banks, some of whom are represented today, to help very intentionally focus. But if you just take a look here on the screen, sectors we already know that have been most impacted, tourism, restaurants, small business, arts organizations, nonprofits, et cetera. The data is clear. I think right now our opportunities are to triage and with as much purpose go after the most affected at this point. So, Christy, I'm going to stop there with my overview of the city and leave some other additional comments for the panel.
Christy, you're on mute there. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, now we can hear you.
Oh, I was just going away, wasn't I? Well, Megan, thank you. I think we're all excited to hear those recommendations for stimulus. Quite frankly, if you could you go over some of those before we take some questions, because that may answer some questions, and then, but certainly leave us time to have a healthy discussion.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, I think, Christy, and I've talked to, gosh, I have so many friends on this conversation today who I talk to so regularly, and so some of this will not be new information, but I kind of put them in two categories. Pre-COVID, things that I was already thinking about and very focused on in the official capacity here, and then post-COVID. Before COVID, resiliency was a very common theme, a very important topic. So resiliency for me is where I think we can have the most, I'll say, bang for our buck in Columbus, is really the resilient Columbus specific areas, such as expanding green energies, energy efficiencies. And that specifically is because the more that we can keep those monies here, it's a multiplier effect. The same people doing the work are going to be local, and that really does help kind of inspire and really, broaden our economy while also making us more resilient long-term. Accelerating contactless government is a big thing for me too right now. That's very, tangible when it comes to our pandemic and people's inability to actually get action from government. I would like us all as a government to really continue the faster access points, assisting companies with adopting some of those new technologies. Some of the e-commerce platforms, some of them can be very pricey, and our small and medium-sized businesses may simply not be able to afford. Factually, a lot of folks are putting the investments on their personal credit in order to stay afloat. And so as we look at the present, I would love for our expansion of future stimulus to also allow more for things like software, e-commerce platforms, and the technological opportunities to grow. Also, and Christy, you and I have talked a lot about this, with kind of upskilling workforce in advance of automation. We know that that's on the horizon, and we know it's forthcoming, but Columbus State's doing a really great job there too. With respect to kind of COVID, how my line of thought has shifted, I'm thinking, I could not be more proud of our local financial innovation around here. And, Suzanne's on the phone, Stephanie Hightower is there. These, and I've talked to these individuals all the time, and I got to tell you, the more that we can do with respect to banking and credit access right now, getting all parties who are on that chart that I've identified as high risk, those jobs that are not able to work or who are struggling right now, the more we can do to meet their needs. COVID in many respects is a cash flow issue. There will be a period of time where we're able to rebound, but the more we can do to keep these folks afloat and get them through to the other side, the stronger we will be as a local economy. And that's what's really special is look at Huntington's Lift Local business, $25 million. They fully reduced their requirements that were previously mandated by, I think, the SBA, using their weight as a large organization. And now, if you have a nonviolent offense, you have terrible credit, you got a second chance. Same with Fifth Third. Those are all outcomes as a result of us lifting that up, and I'm so proud of that. We will see the needle move from those programs. I would like right now, Christy, to be very thoughtful about taking the data and intentionally reaching out to the sectors who are most impacted and sharing that openly with the banks, sharing that with the local lending organizations. Secondly, that's innovation with finance. I'd like to see, on the second point, I'd like to see the city of Columbus do more to, I know the disparity study, there was a memo that was released earlier talking about advancements in procurement, really being specifically driven to have more of our contracting here at the city in the women and minority bucket. I'd really like us to try and also be very thoughtful as organizations, all of us, to really buy from new or young businesses right now and keep them, moving here locally. Lastly, fines and fees is a big item for me. I really like, and these are all, right now there's a great topic around City Hall about how are fines and fees, are they equitable? And for me personally as auditor, I would actually rather see us right now look at, are they necessary? What is the effectiveness of actually the cost of business license, the cost of pulling permits and so forth? And are they barriers to new or young businesses or those trying to get back on their feet? So those are ideas that I've kind of lifted up around here. It's a lot of information that I just left you. It's all bouncing around, but the most important thing you can give back to me really is personal experience.
Thank you, Megan. I want to turn it over now to our panel, and I can't see everyone, so people should either drop in the chat that they're ready to ask a question or jump in there. jumping in there is probably the best way to get started, so we can ask questions of our two panelists. Celeste?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I think it's really a great presentation, and thank you so much for Megan and Eric for your thoughtful and very data-driven presentation that you did. I observed that there is a lot of companies coming to Central Ohio region and in Columbus. But my observation, and especially in the workforce development, when we work with different companies, they are settled outside the limit of Columbus, like West Jefferson, Rickenbackers, New Albany, and the east side to Lancaster area. Would that really, number one, what is the effort of the city to bring those companies to settle in the proper city of Columbus? And second is that what is really the effect and the impact, this trend, having these new companies coming to Central Ohio and settled outside the limit of the city of Columbus?
Megan, Eric?
I
So-
think Mike Stevens, for me, would be better suited to answer that, Christy, than me.
Mike, are you
Yeah,
with us?
yeah.
Okay.
I am. Thank you, Auditor Kilgore. I think it's the challenge of, we need to approach our economic development and business attraction efforts as a regional approach, because as a region, we're stronger to get that national attention we need. We need to be competitive as a local community, whether we're one of the suburbs or city proper, once those projects are identified and put in the pipeline by One Columbus. We try to make sure that the incentive tools we have are competitive with our suburban communities, so there's a level playing field. But I'll tell you, while we don't get every project within the city of Columbus, it's important that our suburban communities have some wins as well. But I'm comfortable with the amount of wins we're bringing in, and I think we need to continue to invest in our infrastructure and some other parts of our community so we can continue to be competitive for those jobs that we're attracting into the region. That was a real long-winded way to say that we are competing as hard as possible to win every job in the city of Columbus. But we also recognize that we need to approach this from a regional perspective.
Is Kenny McDonald with us today?
Christy, he texted me. He had to go to an executive meeting at the partnership. This is Sue.
Oh, okay.
He was here earlier.
Oh, okay. I was hoping maybe he could add to that. Sue, I know that you are on the One Columbus board. Is there anything that you would want to add, or should we wait until we have Kenny and we pummel him with questions on this?
I think Kenny,
topic?
I think it would be great to have Kenny talk through it. He certainly could be more specific. The most important thing when I sit on the board is that we are not waiting, that we are going to be ready for economic expansion when it happens. And so that we are preparing and making sure we have space and the right types of things. And the banks are aligned to do the financing for spec buildings, for example. Jobs Ohio is doing projects that normally wouldn't get financed. They're part of the capital stack. But we have to be looking at what we might need 2 years from now versus the panic we might feel now. And panic might not be the right word. So we have to be aligned with that. Just like the peninsula is going to be starting. It is started. And we've got to keep leaning forward if we want to be the winners, because after all of, cities are going to be in competition for growth, and we have to be poised for that growth. And so if we slow down, we will not be ready. And that's a theme Kenny talks about in our board meetings, but he should be here to talk about specifics. He'd be a great speaker.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Christy,
yes.
it's Eric. If I could just briefly add to what's already been said, a couple of thoughts from a county perspective. First, in one sense, Celeste, we are proud of all of our children. As a Franklin County government, we're agnostic as to whether jobs may be attracted to one municipality or another. But I would say the larger point is the one that Mike made, which is that I think there is a lot of recognition that we're all in this together as a region, and B, regional collaboration to ensure that the growth is happening in our region as compared to other places. We are sales tax driven, so we are a different governmental entity in terms of revenue than municipalities, and that tends to be a secondary or derivative impact from economic growth. But from where I sit, I do think the city of Columbus competes, but more importantly, the region as a whole, when needed, comes together and competes against other regions.
Yeah, that's great.
The other thing, Heather, I know you have a question, but I want to give, it's Sandy, I can't see everyone, Sandy Doyle Ahern, because she works a lot, in the development space. I wondered if Sandy may have a point of view here as well.
So Christy, I am having a really hard time hearing what you just said.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just wondering if you have a point of view, given the development work that you do, about this as well.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Sandy?
Yeah, it's for whatever reason you're cutting out for me. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I think you asked about a point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess what I would say, kind of teeing off a little bit of what Sue just mentioned regarding development opportunities, and then Eric about the regional opportunities. I think what we're seeing kind of going into next year is what I hope will continue to be some pretty significant regional opportunities. I'm probably more concerned about the small businesses that Megan mentioned earlier and what that's going to look like. I think the unemployment situation is pretty dramatic, and unfortunately, we're seeing the impact of that dramatic effect. And you're going to find this odd, but hard to find employees at a certain level, and even hard to find employees at a more educated level. So it's a very odd situation right now. But I actually think that the overall economy of the region is going to be pretty bullish for next year based on some of what we're hearing. I don't know if that answers your question, Christy, because I couldn't really hear you, but hopefully it did.
That does answer my question. I'm talking on my phone to you all.
I see you.
Heather, can you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. I think my question is for Auditor Kilgore. We had our last committee meeting, and there was an idea that was briefly discussed around, is there an opportunity for Columbus to do something to help reposition itself as sort of like a go-to place for people in bigger cities who now are working remote and aren't necessarily geographically tied to those cities. And we had an initial kind of very short conversation about it. And then it was interesting to see that same week that Austin, Texas was featured in the Wall Street Journal for basically doing that exact same thing. And so they seem to be moving quickly on that. And Megan, I was wondering if in some of the conversations that you've been having with either other auditors or other counterparts in other cities, are there other cities where you think they've been acting quickly and boldly that maybe could inspire some of the things that we're doing, or where you think they've seen very innovative programs that as a committee would be beneficial as we're thinking about what we could be recommending for Columbus?
Yeah, it's one of the multifaceted approach, right? Because that, one of the slides I shared, Sandy, you hit on something that is very difficult right now, and that is we are a tale of two cities. I am so on Columbus. Oops, there's a great feedback right now. Everyone, okay. I'm very bullish on Columbus because we do have this growth, but I'm deeply concerned about our growing and increasingly growing divide as a result of COVID. And so, Heather, one of the greatest things that we can do to capitalize on the growth that's coming here, we're the 9th fastest in terms of migration. When you have Oracle, you have major Silicon Valley companies going to Austin. The slides I showed you were really intentional to show you that we are doing the same. That our status, I can name more venture capital that's come in the last couple of years than I could have expected. So our status is growing, and that is going to continue. I'm really interested in some of the innovative investment models that other communities are using. There's like Collab Capital, which is in Atlanta. There's one that's called like, it has like an 1862 or 1863 fund in DC. There's really interesting entrepreneurial capital organizations. There's also the same with nonprofits. What I would personally love to see is for us, because I think that growth is there right now with smart people. I'd love us to take that same innovation and apply it to the small and medium businesses who are really struggling right now. And, you know, in all sincerity, I'm going to ask this question of everyone. I am right now, I'll give you an example. Last week, and Michael Smith, and you would love this, I had a colleague share my personal cell phone with a number of LGBT-owned businesses who are struggling and were not qualifying for some of the recovery grants of the city or some of the other programs. And I got about 25 calls from gay-owned businesses in one single night. Now, I have a whole different appreciation for the Tom Katzenmeyers and others who do this all the time with phone calls. But it was really a spectacular opportunity to hear qualitative data on people's experiences in applying, trying to figure out the forms, understanding what they were not doing right or what they were doing right. And what I'm struggling with is how do we collect that data meaningfully? Because I know if we have this company come and they say we need X, I know Huntington's, the Fifth Thirds, the PNCs, the Keys, someone will fit ideally for that company. I just don't know how to access that survey data, if that makes sense. Michael's shaking his head. You work with these folks a lot, I'm sure, Michael.
Yeah, I do, and I don't want to get into like too deeply taking up the time of the committee at the moment because that's not what we're going over, but that is fascinating to hear about. And I think that's again, a lot of the more marginalized parts of our community we look at, the LGBTQ factor is just one group of those that are again, indeed, as you're seeing, firsthand, suffering. A lot of those are in the similar, businesses of restaurants and other small businesses and things like that are really impacted from multiple directions with this. And I think a big part of what you just brought up is really being able to navigate things and understand how to do it in a more simplified way so that they aren't we're not creating more barriers for them to get access to information, to funds, whatever it might be. If they're going to get frustrated and feel like, wow, I don't even know how to did I fill out the wrong form? Where does it go? When is some black hole? What happened to it? Who do I call now to follow up? What happens if I don't hear anything? All those kinds of things are things we have to be thinking about.
Hi, Christy, this is Stephanie Hightower. And I guess, Megan, that's really fascinating. If in fact we can, Megan and Michael, if there's a way to get that data, I think it would also be important to disaggregate of those LGBTQ businesses, how many of those are minorities. I think that is really important because we and Sue worked very closely with us, Huntington and some of our other financial institutions, when we were going through the process for the PPP dollars. We found that, these small minority-owned businesses were having the exact same issues that Megan, you just talked about. So it sounds like it's not just a minority issue, but it's just issue period at the end. But I would be curious if we could disaggregate that data. I think would be really important too.
Yes, Stephanie, I agree with you. And Megan, I do love that you have those. And maybe there's a way we can all talk a little more deeply offline here about how to do that and work together with that. And I think that'll also be very beneficial information to bring to this committee as well.
Hey, Christy,
We can, talk however you want to handle that offline. We can all talk about that. Christy, if there's ways we can coordinate that, we can talk about that. I would love to be a part of it.
Yeah, we should definitely do that because that gets to the why. We start looking at those businesses that were not able to access the resources and so forth, and then we have to start figuring out where are the similarities. Why did that happen? And ultimately, we want to make recommendations from this committee so that doesn't happen again. And on a go forward basis, those businesses pandemic or not, now have access to those resources. So I think we should, kind of have an off, kind of off the record, not off the record, offline conversation, and then off record, and then bring it back together. And I see Rachel Lustig has a question. Rachel,
I'm sorry, Christy. Can I make one? Christy, it's Eric. Can I just maybe make one quick point before you move on to the next question? If it's okay.
Sure.
I kind of wanted to go back. I think this discussion that we just had was really important. I know one of the things that we did as a county and worked with the city and some other partners on were trying to adjust programs on the fly as we created them this past year, so that we were trying to capture people that might not otherwise be eligible or fall through the cracks. And it's something that we're going to have to maintain throughout 2021. But I want to kind of get back to Heather's question a little bit, just because I think it brings up a broader point, perhaps, that this committee can contemplate. And that is sort of the push and pull between trying to figure out what we need to do in the immediate sense. How do we help these small businesses that we're talking about, or people stay in homes, or provide rental assistance, or other things? And how do we also then think about, at the same time, because it's not an either or question, think about how we can adjust as a county, city, community towards some of the longer term trends that are going to come out of this pandemic. And when you are things like remote working, future transportation investments, those kinds of things. And in my judgment, and maybe you all are already doing this, that could be where this committee does a real service, because those of us that work in municipal or county government are so often focused on the day-to-day, week-to-week, or maybe the year-to-year, that it's important that we get assistance in thinking about some of the long-term strategic elements of how the nature of work is going to change, how the nature of how we travel is going to change, and how the nature of how we interact is going to change as a result of this, and how what recommendations might be able to be made to folks like us on the call, the city and the county, to prepare for it. I think it's a really important point.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. And we will definitely, try to be as forward-looking as we can in our work. Rachel?
Yeah, thanks, Christy. Appreciate it. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm struck, first off, I'm so grateful for the presentations. I'm particularly struck by the comment on the K and how we're talking about the increased disparity as it relates to employers. And then I'm also struck by Sandy's comment about how much we're struggling to kind of fill open positions currently. At Catholic Social Services, we work with so many working poor families who are currently dealing with excruciating decision that whether to, where they're deciding between their livelihood, their health, and the education of their children. And I think they know the long-term consequences of these decisions that they're making in this moment. So one of the things that's on my mind is we're looking at these employers who are going to need a workforce in the future. I'm also concerned about how do we help people stay in the workforce? How do we retain them? I mean, I hear us talking about upskilling or preparing people for the long term, but working with a lot of working poor families, many of them are one flat tire away from losing their job because they're struggling to make their car breaks down one day and then the next day their child care falls through. So as people have been in this extended period of crisis, when they try to go back into some of these jobs, I think what we can do to stabilize the workforce will help us to really stabilize some of those employers going forward. And I think we might be able to be in a position to be really forward thinking about how we do that.
Christy, this is Sandy. I don't know if you can hear me. Rachel, that is a great point, and I want to add one quick comment to what you just said, because I think actually a big factor in this, and certainly not the only factor, but the transportation piece of this is extremely important. We can't overlook it because you're exactly right. And when people get in that situation and can't get to work, we know it's a huge problem. I think we were actually making some good progress prior to the pandemic with alternative modes of transportation that would allow people on a more micro level to get to jobs, and CODA has been playing a big role in that. What I'm hoping is that they will be in a position to revamp some of that effort. And by no means do I mean to imply that that fixes the problem, but it is definitely part of it. And I don't think we can rely on individual people to find their way to work alone all the time. It just doesn't work. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And I know that's not what this call is about yet today either. So I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but I'm hoping we can revisit that at some point in the future with CODA and others.
Yeah, and Transportation Day is January 6th, so it's the first meeting when we get back from Christmas break. But somewhat to that point, I want to ask another question, make a statement, ask another question. My statement is, many of those issues that Rachel, that you just discussed, were here before the pandemic and have been exacerbated because of the pandemic. So, you know, I start to ask myself, what are we as a community, what are we going to do differently so that we know this is a problem, whether it's, you know, transportation or people living, you know, on very little, you know, what are we going to do differently, and what things have come out of the pandemic that demonstrate that we can there's some things that we can do. So my example is rental assistance. For a very long time, as it related to affordable housing, rental assistance was kind of off the table for those of us who are advocates for affordable housing, and yet we all know the data tells us, we've seen it work in other cities where rental assistance is a game changer for someone, whether they're going to Columbus State or working poor or hit a bad, you know, time in their life. That gap money, especially because of the way our rental market is, can help someone stay housed as opposed to becoming homeless or couch surfing or whatever. So my question would be, since we basically had a demonstration project, I say this to the city and the county, of this year of rental assistance because of the CARES money, can we now put it back on the table for affordable housing? Is that something that we can bring back? And can we start looking at a true rental assistance program that might help people stay housed, stay in their homes, not have to make choices about health care over rent or food over rent, et cetera?
So, Christy, this is Trudy. I mean, I think that's a really great point. And I guess my question is, you know, given the Biden administration coming in right now and looking particularly at Marcia Fudge potentially being the new cabinet member for HUD, I think this is really the opportune time for us to look at it from a policy standpoint, because there are so many policies within HUD that prevent us from doing so much that makes sense, but there are always barriers to it. You know, so for instance, with Ohio State, we're looking at what are some of the things we can do we are a microcosm of what is going on in the city of Columbus. So the housing instability, the food instability are issues that our students are facing as well. So how do we look at this in a big picture standpoint, looking at what the points are that we need for policy change, and then not look at it in a piecemeal way? I mean, I understand what you're saying as far as what the CARES Act has demonstrated to us, particularly around rental assistance. But that's one of so many issues within housing that we really need to look at for over the long term or even the short term. But I think the policy changes are really going to make the difference as far as the way you can spend the money, who you can spend it with. You know, what are the criteria? Who's over income? I mean, those are so antiquated right now, and they've been decisions made by folks who don't even understand what poverty is. So how do we just make a reset? And this group really being that catalyst for change.
Christy, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry, This is the phone thing. I do want to give Eric a quick chance to respond because he does a lot of housing work at the county, and I don't know if you have a point of view, Eric, or any thoughts.
I have a couple points of view, or a couple thoughts, no particular order. One is I think Trudy makes a lot of really good points. A lot of times when you talk about rental assistance more narrowly and housing, affordable housing policy more generally, you really are talking about something that you need leadership from on the federal level. And so I do think there's an opportunity to advocate for those kinds of changes and those kinds of resources. From our point of view, in the short term, I would expect that we're going to continue to do rental assistance as resources are available. I will, however, say that the programs that we have set up, and I think some of the other programs that have been set up, are really the truest of the true in terms of emergency rental assistance, as opposed to some sort of a longer term rental subsidy for folks. That gets a little trickier and can get a little costlier. I don't mean to dismiss it out of hand, but I do think it's an important distinction. And then finally, I would just add that as we focused at the county on affordable housing, we've recognized two things. One is there is just simply a lack of supply in affordable housing in this community, and we were leaving state/federal dollars on the table by not having programs that incentivized and leveraged other dollars towards affordable housing construction. And secondly, that we are thinking long and hard about making so that our investments are part of a broader picture for assisting folks, whether it's workforce investments and importantly, transportation investments, which I think are mentioned earlier. Our affordable housing framework that we put together in 2019 before all this hit really prioritized our affordable housing project investments in identified transportation corridors. So I do think there's just a lot of different things to consider. It is not to rule rental assistance out of hand, but rather figure out sort of the mix and match of what can be done at the local level, what can be done at the federal level, and how you match supply and demand together.
Okay, all good points raised, lots of ideas swirling around in my head, and I know others will have other thoughts as we move to the working stage of this work group stage of this committee. To Megan and Eric, thank you for being with us here today. My parting comments are always that we reserve the right to call you back when we go in the working group, because you'll have updated information and we'll have more questions, and we can take some deeper dives into some areas. So I hope that when the invitation comes, you will join us and bring colleagues or others if you need to. To everyone else in the committee, I know that the government channel wants this forum back. So I just want to say happy holidays to everyone. Thank you all for hanging in there, dealing with the technology, all the things, all the various topics and the learnings. And we look forward to seeing you. And to thank you to our city staff, Kinston, Hannah, and Mike Stevens. Just indebted to you all for keeping everything organized and so forth. And Almar, yes, how could we forget him? Because he is responsible for getting our PowerPoints up on the screen. Happy holidays, and we'll see you all on January 6th. Everyone stay safe and healthy.
Have a nice holiday.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great holiday. Take care.
Thanks for inviting me.